This presentation is really about, I have a lot of friends, colleagues, people ask me questions like, what should I be doing regarding cyber, if anything? I'm a small business, I just started, or, who's would be after me? And so basically what I did is put down a few points of suggestions that I've given to friends and colleagues, and I put it into a brief presentation that I'll be giving in just a few seconds. And then once it's done, open it up for questions. Feel free to put your questions in the box. But we'll get to those towards the end. So I am going to share, I have a PowerPoint. Let's see if I can get this going. Am I sharing my screen? Awesome, thank you very much. Thank you. As I said, this is a cybersecurity 101, cybersecurity basics. Literally, as I said, this is a quasi technology business conversation, but really what can you do to secure your small business, your new startup, with all the hackers that are out there. So let me get started. Need to move the screen. Okay. So my name is Ayanna Haskins. I am part of the Datcher Group, which is an information security company. And we were founded to really manage that convergence of business risk and IT security. My background traditionally is really management consulting, started doing ERP implementations, really focused on security, infrastructure, and business operations for large global firms like the Fortune 20, Fortune 30. I've also worked for those large firms in the innovation capacity, where I've partnered with startups to bring them into more of the enterprise. So that was a lot of fun. That's kind of where I got the bug for some of this entrepreneurial conversation. And then I switched over a few years ago to just solely working in the cybersecurity space, because there's just so much to do, so much to learn, and so many things to just keep on top of that I really had to kind of harrow in on just being good at it. So I think my broad professional experience really puts me in a good place to have this conversation. All right. So when we're talking about threats, what I want to do is just really kind of solidify us onto the same page. So as entrepreneurs, our priorities are all about getting your product or service to market. No one's really, really concerned about security. It's kind of something that, oh, when I get larger or when I'm quote unquote relevant, it's something to worry about. But what I want to do with this slide is really give some context as to cybersecurity is truly an operational risk. It's up there with fraud. It's up there with third-party fraud. Third party would be some of the vendors, the cloud brokers that you deal with. Processing transactions. So if someone hijacks your transaction, you're transacting funds or monetary human error. People click the wrong button and something's deleted or destroyed or configuration is changed. And then you have regulatory compliance. All these things are things that impact your business from an operational perspective. And this slide, as I said, is really trying to represent that cybersecurity is not just technology. It's not just about something that you can choose to do or not to do. But if you're concerned about your operational risk, your ability to be an ongoing concern, function, all your tasks are going, you definitely should actually keep this in the back of your head of what can I do at a minimum at my size with the resource that I have to help protect me. And that's what this is about. So this is operational risk exists in every organization, regardless of size, including startups. So really, let's define what cybersecurity is. Cybersecurity is all about the processes and technique involved in protecting sensitive data, your computer systems, networks, and software applications from cyber attacks. Now, depending on how large or small, or whether you're like manufacturing, whether you're totally in the cloud, whether you have offices on-prem, you still have processes, you still have techniques, you have things that you implement to get your business done on a daily basis. So cybersecurity is really about the protection of it. So it's not something to be scared about, but it's what are you doing in defense of your business. So from a startup perspective, I like this picture because it's really the collaboration, people working together, which I find is great. Cybersecurity threats are continually evolving. So the hackers that are out there are getting better and better every minute, every day. And our businesses are reshaping constantly. So we're in the cloud, everything's connected. So we have the IoT stuff. We have, as I said, cloud is out there. We have vendors that we partner with because no business kind of does everything by themselves. So everything's connected. So really, when you start thinking about cybersecurity, it's your ability to control the things that affect your ability to conduct business. Those breaches, if you happen to have one, can compromise your intellectual property that you've worked so hard to develop and to secure. It could even be your employees that are causing challenges, and or your customer information gets out there. And the consequences can be lasting. There could be legal and or reputational damage if you are not secure or if you have not figured out how to protect yourself from a breach. And that's what we're going to be talking about a little bit more. So one of the things that makes any business, but specifically a startup, which is the conversation, is really that organizations are open to attack because you really don't understand your cybersecurity posture. Or what are the threats for my business? As I said, as I talk to a lot of colleagues and friends, people are like, why would somebody want to attack me? Why would somebody come after my business? And sometimes what I want to say is not necessarily like people are coming after you. It's just full on assault. Like a lot of these hackers, they just go after just vulnerabilities that are out there online. So a lot of us have cloud applications. So if they go after that cloud application or that company, your company could be impacted. So what are you doing to protect yourself in there? And then understanding what your exposure is or what could be vulnerable to your business is really something that you're going to want to know and be aware of. So at least you can take some steps to secure yourself a little bit. So this, I think, kind of brings it home a little bit for those who think cybersecurity is really all about technology and like, hey, I'm not in technology game. My business, makes widgets. We're not really technical. We're not super dependent, but business is really about making decisions and executing on them. And so if you're going to protect yourself from cyber threats, preparation is key. So you have to get that plan in place and execute on that plan in order to begin defending yourselves from what those cyber attacks that are out there. So what I wanted to do is really just, now that we've been grounded in why this is important and why startups really just need to do something. And I called it basic cybersecurity because it really is about the basics. I mean, we can go really crazy, get extra, just really sophisticated about the attacks, but there's a lot of basic things we can do that can really protect ourselves. And number one is really getting an inventory. So I tell everybody this, get a basic understanding of all your critical information assets and where they are at and how they're stored. And why this is critical, when we start talking about critical information assets, we're talking about the things that run your business. So let's say you didn't have your customer list. Could you run your business? Let's say you were unable to order product to build your product. Could you run your business? Communicating with your customers, clients, and potential customers. Could you run your business? But really understanding what are those critical information assets you need to run your business and having a list of them. So you're going to perform an inventory of all these IT devices. That includes your desktops, your laptops, smartphones, printers, applications. So those might be on-premise or things that you install on your desktop and or applications that you may use in the cloud. So I gave a few examples because email is pretty big. Software, web browsers, some of the websites that you, and then the last piece, which is really important, I don't think people think enough about, is really inventory. Who has access to your systems? All your users, and then who has administrative access? And your administrative access, you want to really keep up to a limited amount, and that would include employees, consultants, contractors, vendors. Just having a list of everybody that's engaged in your business, keeping that inventory is key. as a first step. So the other piece of that inventory is really all about the data, because that really is another piece of the game. So what I tried to do is a couple of the big areas of where I find people aren't really securing it enough. So you have what they call personally identifiable information. So if you are creating, storing, and/or transacting, so maybe you're doing it with a vendor, maybe you're doing it within your organization. But the PII data could include people's first and last names, their addresses, their email address, credit card numbers, bank accounts, taxpayer IDs, medical records, social security numbers. These are all personally identifiable information that you need to secure. The other one to look at is really your customer information. When you think about your customers, like payment information, back to the card numbers, your billing and shipping address. These are the things you should be securing. And one thing that I think comes up a lot, which is more so I find from an entrepreneurial perspective, is really the intellectual property. Everybody's aware I need to secure the intellectual property, but this is the proprietary sensitive data, such as like financial data, your product designs, even your human resource data, internal messages. Maybe you have emails where you're having sensitive conversations that you wouldn't want to get out. But include intellectual property of others with whom you have business relationships. So a lot of times we're working with other companies and we have contractual obligations that we secure that data that we are privy to a certain level, that we're backing it up, that it's being encrypted while it's in transit, it's encrypted when it's at rest. So that piece of intellectual property, really take a good look at the contracts that you're signing and what's that security standard that that partner is going to be holding you to. So that's another big one that comes in a lot. But data is key, because this will come up a lot on just how much of a target your organization may be, and just what level of security you may have to put in there. The next one is really to just get grounded. So now that you have your list of all your devices, you understand what data that you have, and you understand your contractual obligations. So what do I do with this? And to me, the next step that I tell people is really understand what are the common types of cyber attacks. So we can't be exhaustive. You are a small business entrepreneur, and you have a lot of other things to worry about. So what I do is just hone on what are the common attacks that are going on, and just understanding what risk am I at from my devices, from the data that I have to those type of attacks. So the basic understanding of the data and the systems, you can now kind of educate yourself on some of the common cyber attacks. Big one is malware. I'm sure a lot of people have seen that right now. There's an attack that's going on at a lot of the hospitals. And a lot of that's coming through email. So the malwares come, someone clicks on a link, that malware is now installed, and then it's going throughout the hospital. What it's doing is locking the files, so you can't get into any of the medical records and or the systems used to run the hospital, to treat patients, to even the back office functionality. You have phishing attacks, which is huge. So a lot of these are socially engineered, where somebody may send you a email and it looks legit. Maybe looks like it's coming from HR, or maybe it's coming from a colleague, and they're asking you to send money or click on this link. And they're so familiar, and it looks so familiar that you click on it, and then you're exposed. Another one is the man in the middle, and this is kind of like that eavesdropping. So maybe you go to a site and you don't realize that it's really not the site that you intended to go to, because it looks just like it, but they're literally scraping the data that you put in, whether it's the username, password, or any data that's just floating now in clear text that they can pull down. Big one, so this is probably bigger for the folks that do development in-house and run their own systems, the denial of service attacks. So this is when there's just enough traffic that is thrown at your servers, where basically it exhausts the server so it cannot respond to any legitimate requests for service. So that's denial of service attack, which is probably pretty big. Then the last one is really the zero-day exploit. And this is all about vulnerabilities, patching your system. So software day zero, basically if there was a flaw in a software, day zero means that there's not a patch for it yet. So in theory, when new patches come out for software, you should actually do it immediately, because for the most part, industry-wise, there's fixes for this stuff. The problem is people don't patch their systems. So that day zero is really that gap between, hey, we know that this is a bug and we fix the bug. The problem is we as users aren't always too quick to install those patches on top of it. So that's the last one. But these are common cyber attacks. There's a bunch of other ones, but these are the ones that really rank up there that come out most often. So from a prioritization perspective, getting familiar and understanding your exposure to these type of attacks will take you a long way. So one fact that I always think is interesting, so Verizon comes out with its data breach investigation report every year. This year, it stated that 80% of data breaches is caused by weak or stolen passwords. To me, that was just absolutely amazing, because I think sometimes we read a lot of these stories and we think that there's a whole lot of sophistication, just really talented folks. Not that there's not. There's quite a few talented hackers out there, but it's really the simple things. And that's really what I wanted to get at with this presentation of, like, if we can get the basics done, there's a lot of things we can do to secure our systems, just doing the basics. So this is a really interesting piece, and I have this link down here as well. So I have 5 things simply that I think every business, every entrepreneur should do. And again, this is back to the base. There's a bunch of other things as you mature that I would recommend. But from a resource perspective, that's from just knowledge, monetary, just all of that. You can do these things relatively cheaply and relatively quickly, and it'll help to secure you. Number one, just really based on that statistic, then just, I'm sure you see it a lot, it's really just getting your passwords together. Passwords are one of the most critical problems in cybersecurity. So those are like weak passwords, passwords that people reuse, people just forget. So the big recommendation is that you use strong passwords. Use multi-factor authentication. And what that is that, so you're doing at least 2. So 1 is something that you know, and that's the password. So you enter your username, your password, that's something you know. And then number 2, from a multi-factor, you're using something you have. So that might be an app on your phone where you get a code that you're gonna plug in, and or you just say, hit yes, and it allows you into the website. And what that's good for, I tell people, like, you can't get the strong password, you can't get really creative on new passwords and that level of sophisticated, because you're not gonna remember. Multi-factor is another door. So at least if you have a weaker password in multi-factor, you have another level of protection for it, which I think is easier. And then last but not least, please do not reuse password. So one of the things that hackers do is what they call credential stuffing. So if your information, let's say your username and password were breached, they will try that username and password combination on all sorts of sites. So if you have used it in the past, it can be used in the future, you know, to wreak havoc in your life again. So just make sure you don't reuse passwords. So at least, at the very least, you're only susceptible to one site, but traditionally, definitely don't reuse passwords. The next piece is patches, the vulnerabilities. So a lot of these patches, even with these ransomware, so even if you were to click on some of these bad links, people trying to install malware on your system, if it was patched, if you had up-to-date patching, it could actually quarantine that malware, so it's actually not installed. So patching is a really, really good piece to really secure your system, so that it knows that that's a bug and it fixes it. So the software patches are code fixes that repair broken functionality, may add new functionality, or fix security holes in the software that you're using. So this is definitely a step I would take, and it's a little onerous. People don't really think about patching per se, but maybe just put yourself on some sort of cadence where you go out there and check maybe once a month or so, but just some sort of rhythm. Maybe just put in your calendar that you update your system to whatever the latest patches is to secure yourself. Number three, a big one is training. So how to identify that, you know, someone's trying to phish me, someone's trying to trick me into clicking a link, someone is sending me something that I don't want to click on. That's only going to come with education and training. And there's a lot of free resources out on the web that you can do for yourself and or for your employees and or consultants. They can do just from training, just so you start recognizing some of the social engineering. As I said, it's getting, people are getting really sophisticated. It's hard to tell the difference between what's real and what's not. And the only way you're going to stay up to date with that is really that continuous training. So be aware of those phishing scams. Startups can protect themselves through education and training. As I said, there's a lot of free resources out there. Again, this is your time, not necessarily money, but the education will go a long, long, long way. The fourth one is really backups, and that's huge. So backing up data regularly will allow you to restore if you have a breach. So if unfortunately you click on a link, you have some ransomware, you have malware or something that's causing your systems to act wacky or you can't access data, having that backup will allow you to restore to prior to that incident happening. Now, if you don't have a backup, you could lose everything. So again, backups, you can either back up to a local drive. Ideally, you back up to something that's not on your network, because typically, if you're infected, your network is infected as well. So maybe an offsite or something in the cloud. And a lot of the cloud backups actually check for that malware to see, so you can really, it looks at the backup, the files that you're backing up to make sure you're not bringing any of the malware to your backup, because then obviously that would cause a problem when you went back to restore. So having that backup regularly offsite is key in your ability to be able to restore if you are hacked or someone gets into your system. The last one is really access. I find this one is big, and this is really about two things. One, the number of people that have access to your system. So you want to keep people who have access to your system only to the people who need it. And number two, limit the number of admins. So admins are people who can change your system. They can edit data, they can change parameters and really expose you to hackers. So there's this concept of principle of least privilege, where you give people exactly the authority that they need to get their job done. I can't stress enough that this is something that you follow a lot. What I find some organizations over years, they've never really removed people, or people change roles and they just continue to allow them to have the same access they had in prior jobs or responsibilities or engagement. So just paying attention to who has access to your system, and that level of access is just, it's just really crazy, because one of the scenarios that happens sometimes from a hacking perspective is that a hacker can get into your system, and because you have administrative access, they can then elevate themselves. They can actually create an ID for themselves and just kind of hang out in your systems and do whatever they want to do, whether it's today, a month from now, and you won't even know about it. But if you pay attention to who has access, what level of access on a continual basis, you will definitely be in a better spot. So as I said, those are the 5 things, the 5 basic things, suggestions that I typically give to businesses and entrepreneurs. Make sure you get that done first. Most of them are pretty easy, simple, straightforward to get done, but it puts you in a much better position. So every business has data that they need to protect. And unfortunately, it's not a matter of if, but a matter of when an organization will experience cyber and or privileged data privacy theft. So with this presentation, it's really about being prepared, and just don't wait for something to happen, because if you're not prepared, it's hard to come back. And with that, I will open it up for questions.
So what's the first thing someone should do in order to kind of get started down the path of securing cyber?
The first thing I would definitely do is really get into the password piece, so that securing your passwords. So making sure you have strong passwords on your system. So you can either do that with what they call, you can do it with policies that forces a certain password standard. I'd also get two-factor authentication on there, so that any resources, any people who are in your systems, whether they're partners, employees, friends that are in your system, they are also using it too. That would be the first step, is to really get secure access to your system, so at least you know who's in there. Any other questions or comments? I know these things are pretty simple, but you'd be amazed that a far majority of these breaches, if you really read the fine print, are because of simple things like that they've gotten into the system. So it's not some sophisticated hack by any stretch of the imagination. It's just not doing the basics. So it's one of the first things I do when I start sitting down with clients, is just making sure that they have practiced just really good cyber hygiene before we start getting into the more sophisticated levels of securing their systems and data.
Hi, Ayanna.
Could you?
Hello.
When you sit down with your clients, do you start taking them through the cyber hygiene process? Do you suggest to them a password manager?
Yes and no. Some depending on the organization. So I can suggest a password manager, but too, sometimes people have their favorites. Maybe that's the better way. They have their favorite vendors that they want to use. So in that case, I just kind of go by criteria. But if an organization is looking for suggestions on password managers, it's great. I just recently started using, probably like 6 months ago, which I'm loving, is Bitwarden. It's relatively inexpensive. It's pretty sophisticated for what it is, and it's $10 a year. You can use it for enterprise, which I think is great. So like if I'm working with a colleague and we need to have your password, we can share that. So we can each log in. That way, you know, as the client, who logged in last, even though it's just one account. We have one place to go for that, but you use one password to kind of solve that. That way you're not passing passwords around to each one of your colleagues, which also causes its own problems. But yeah, there's quite a bit out there. The big thing is just to use it. There's a lot of family accounts that are out there. Some people use that, you know, for their kids or for maybe older people in their family, things of that nature. So you can do family accounts where, you know, you can log in on behalf of others. But yeah, you can definitely make some recommendation. But I like it because it's open source as well. And they're bringing a lot of cool stuff to the table pretty quickly. So, and for $10 a year, you really can't beat it. Actually, you can use it for free. I take that back, but then you're maxed at a number of passwords. I think I'm up to like 350 now, which is ridiculous. But the good thing, you know, you have these long passwords, but then you're also using two-factor authentication. And recently I started doing the hardware piece using the FIDOs. So there's a lot of different ways to layer on a lot of technology, but really good question. But client asks for suggestion, I will give. And then some just sometimes ask for just, what am I looking for? And you give that, and that's in the context of that person's business. If it's consulting, if it's all internal. Some of these password managers, notes, you have to look at, like from a HIPAA perspective, some of this data that you're securing, how you're securing it. So there's a lot of factors that can go into it. But simply said, right now I'm using Bitwarden, and it's great. I've been loving it.
Thank you.
I have a question. So I know that you've been involved in cybersecurity for a bit, and I was just curious, like, what you've seen as the biggest change in cybersecurity, whether it's things that people should look out for versus like questions that you didn't used to get and now you get all the time, or like what the biggest change has been in terms of cybersecurity and cyber attacks.
I would say the biggest change is that people are aware. I think in the past it was really like, this will never happen to me, but I think as things have gotten closer, whether it's you or a friend or a colleague, you're a little bit more aware. The questions are getting bigger, especially I would say with this COVID piece, is a lot of people, so I know that we're talking about startups and entrepreneurs, and most of the people who, if your business is newer, you're probably already in the cloud, but a lot of these older businesses, you had the VPN in, like all access to a lot of the applications were on premise. You had to literally go into the office to get to these applications. With COVID, a lot of these applications are now open. And so that caused a lot of questions about how do I get to these sites? You know, what's a VPN? Is my Wi-Fi secure? There's just a lot of questions in those, because you never had to think about it. A lot of users, you know, you go to work, you do your job, you go home, you're done. But now that you're working from home, it's like, oh yeah, I need that file. How do I get there? So how you have those questions about securely getting there and things going over the web. So those are probably some of the newer questions, more from that remote access perspective, and then just that general awareness of, oh, I could get hacked as well, and it happens. So
Yeah, thank you.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I can't see
So
you. Go ahead.
you cannot?
No, it's fine. I'm teasing.
Okay. So I work for a biotech company, and we have a lot of IP, intellectual property. That's our bread and butter.
Yeah.
And with this COVID situation, folks are forced to work from home as well. So what is your thought on virtual machines versus should I give my employees? I mean, they all have their PCs or Macs, right? Do you have a preference in terms of if somebody wants to intrude our network and whatnot? And do you have any favorite companies that do cloud-based, virtual machines and whatnot? But the question is that, do you have a preference between should I hand them out these machines? And then my biggest fear is that if my folks are, traveling and whatnot, if the machine is lost, then what happens to the data? Because for me, I need access. I mean, I can get them a new machine, but are there any cloud services out there where we, just like an Apple ID, you can log in and have access to the data? Because you can replace the machine, but the data based on their ID is, I want that as well. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's definitely a very good question. It comes up a lot. I've dealt with companies that they literally give you, it's interesting, you have the extreme. So they give you a check for $2,500, whatever, say, go buy whatever you want. What they're gonna do, you're gonna go use you're either gonna use like a VMware, or you're gonna use some sort of thin client to access the resources of the organization. A lot of law firms do it, back to the IP and just keeping things secure, but a lot of it's just simpler from a management perspective of who has access to things. Ideally, I really would use a VMware using virtual machines for that sensitive, because you have a lot more granularity in how you can secure it and lock it down. From a desktop perspective, so if that's still your desktop, your company's desktop, so that's how I'm going to answer this. There are a lot of endpoint management systems that you can use that can say what you can, so then all the data is encrypted, number one, which is what you want. So even if that employee were to lose that laptop or device, no one would be able to read it. But two, you can also protect that they can't copy, they can't kind of copy paste or move data around too much, because it has that digital ID on there. So there's ways to secure data like that. But ideally, I would use some sort of thin client, the VMwares, the Citrix that are out there to secure your environment. And if something's super, super sensitive, you also might want to just keep it behind a firewall, like force VPN access, like add another hop. Like if it's the crown jewels, you might want to make it a little bit difficult. I know it's a lot of friction for employees. They want access to stuff right there, but some things just are better protected further behind the scenes. But there's quite a few options just to secure it, whether from the desktop, whether you're using a virtual machine, or whether you continue to use some sort of VPN where you have to get in there.
And one quick follow-up. So for a small company like mine, are there any good companies which provide training? Because I also feel that training is also important, right? So for folks, I mean, if they don't know what is wrong, they will do whatever they want, right? So what kind of are there companies which can provide the training? Okay, you are not allowed to use a Starbucks Wi-Fi or for a corporate, right? Or that's just one example, but there's so many things that we do unintentionally that can mess up the corporate network and whatnot, right? So are there any companies out there that can help us with that?
Our company does. We do training for employee training just on that topic, but I can also recommend a couple as well. So I can, well, when
Okay.
I shoot you an email, I'll give you a couple of links and you can evaluate them for yourself. But we definitely do that training because that's a big piece. You know, your weakest link is always going to be your employees at the end of the day. So training them is just
Sure. Thanks.
your security program, period. But
Thanks.
definitely help you out on that and give you some criteria on just what to look for in that. But that is a good way to do it.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions? I can't see anything. All I see is myself, Gary, Ryan, and Emily. That's it. So I have no idea what's going on.
Maybe it's hacked. Maybe it's hacked, huh?
I know.
Could you share your slides? They're a really nice summary that I could give out to the non-technical people on my team.
Yes, I can put I can just make a one slider, you know, of just that way. That's definitely can do that.
Yeah, thank you. I get so deep in the technical weeds, I forget about the simple things.
I know that's always been my hardest part. It's just and who was that asked for it? Well, I can just send it out to everybody, so I can work with either Gary or Emily to just send it out to everybody. So fine. Anyone else?
Well, thank you everybody for attending. Let me reiterate the glaring statement that we've all been hearing. Be sure to get out there and vote. Ultimately, you know, this year, just like every other year, it's just as important. So head out there to your voting location, and we can't wait to see you on November 3rd.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.